Gentleman from Prince William.
Addressing the other amendment, Mr. Speaker?
That's what we're hoping you'll tell us about.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, there has been some controversy recently with attempts to compel religious organizations to submit to a rather novel interpretation of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, requiring church-related organizations to make available abortion pills approved by the FDA and other devices which run afoul of the ethical moral policy of churches. And since we are engaged in a process with the federal government right now of negotiating our way with the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, I do not think that the state of Virginia should assist in implementation of a policy which violates the religious statute, the Statute of Religious Freedom back here, authored by Thomas Jefferson. Mr. Speaker, 2 days ago in Washington State, a federal judge struck down a requirement of Washington State law compelling pharmacists to distribute so-called emergency contraceptives. They didn't want to do this because it was abortifacient. So this does no more than that. It simply says that our budget will obey the more than 2 centuries-year-old policy that Jefferson has implemented for us, and so that no money will be used for that. If the federal government's going to go out and do this, they can do it, but Virginia should not participate in any way, Mr. Speaker, so the governor should not comply with that. That's the purpose of the amendment.
Anybody else care to comment on this proposed amendment?
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Alexandria, Mr. England.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask the gentleman, since this deals so directly with federal law, if he thinks it would be far easier for him to address these issues if he held a seat in the United States Congress.
That would probably be correct, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the gentleman.
The question is upon the adoption of the floor amendment proposed by the gentleman from Prince William. Gentleman from Arlington, Mr. Hope.
May I speak to the amendment?
Gentleman has floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I would urge the body to reject the amendment. You know, as we know that there is ongoing litigation.
Gentleman, suspend. House will come to order. Gentleman may proceed.
Well, I was trying to point out to the body that, as we know, that there is ongoing legislation before the Supreme Court. So I don't think that this is the right move for us at this time to make this declaration. If, however, and to that point, the governor and the attorney general and this body has pretty much held off on the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, if at such time that the Supreme Court does rule, and should they rule that the law is constitutional, then at such time it would be appropriate for us to come back and rule on this. But I don't think it's the appropriate time.
Mr. Speaker?
Gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Marshall.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
I will yield.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe the gentleman may have confused the litigation with respect to the individual mandate with this decision by the Obama administration to require these things. There is no litigation, to the best of my knowledge. No one has challenged this at this point. So would the gentleman care to comment on that? Because this is not an object of litigation, whereas the individual mandate is.
I would respond to the gentleman that the Supreme Court will be looking at multiple features of the Affordable Care Act. If, however, they are able to rule that the entire law, and that is in play, that the entire law is unconstitutional, then anything that's subsequent that comes out of the Obama administration related to the Affordable Care Act would also be ruled unconstitutional. And therefore, this provision, which the gentleman is trying to prevent from occurring, will be null and void at that time. So my point is to wait until the Supreme Court has made its decision, and then at that time, if he thinks it's necessary for us to come back, then at such time we could entertain the gentleman's amendment.
One further question, Mr. Speaker?
Will the gentleman yield?
I will yield.
The gentleman yields.
The Attorney General is not seeking to strike down the entire Affordable Care Act, in Virginia anyway, in the litigation. He's only seeking to address the mandate, not this. So I don't understand why we would wait if, in fact, this has been a concern of the 2 bishops of Virginia. It's been a concern of the bishops all over the country and other religious groups that they not be involved with this.
I would respond to the gentleman that the Attorney General of Virginia's issue with the Affordable Care Act is not the only issue that the Supreme Court is entertaining. They are entertaining multiple suits, multiple issues within the Affordable Care Act, not just the individual mandate. Thank you.
Gentleman from Richmond City, Mr. LaPase.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman who's proposed from Prince William please
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'm direct the gentleman to the first sentence of his proposal. It says, no funds appropriated pursuant to this act. What is
Mr.
this
Speaker,
act referring to?
the gentleman is looking at the amendment that the chair ruled out of order.
All right, I'm sorry.
Gentleman from Caroline, Mr. Orrock. Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Plum.
Mr. Speaker, I guess a point of order.
Gentleman state it.
Since this amendment is drawn to House Bill 29, which expires on June 30, 2012, that would mean that these provisions would also expire. Is that not correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'd be really, really careful with this amendment. And maybe it's too much of the lawyer in me, but the way I'm reading it, it says that anything that requiring religious employers or their insurance providers So that says to me that the Catholic Church has Anthem as their insurance providers, and the religious employers deem that those insurance services are contrary to their religious tenets, they could then make Anthem not provide any coverage, any insurance coverage to anybody related to those contraception methods. Beyond that, it's not the policy of this body, generally speaking, to make reference to federal law. We don't even have Public Law 111-148 before us to look at in the context of this amendment being put on here at the very last minute. This is not the way to legislate on the fly. This is the kind of thing you want to be really, really careful about. We don't know the unintended consequences of something like this.
Mr. Speaker.
He wants a bill, let him introduce a bill, have the governor send down a bill. The governor has the ability to send down a bill.
Mr. Speaker.
But it's not appropriate to legislate through the budget this way.
Gentleman Prince William, Mr.
Will the
Marshall.
gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Gentleman inclines to yield.
May I address the point that he raised, Mr. Speaker?
At some point, you have people ahead of you in the queue. The gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Jones.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Speaking, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'd ask that you would reject this amendment. While I understand what the gentleman is trying to accomplish, and I'm a practicing pharmacist, as most of you know, and pro-life, but this is not the way to do this. This should be done through the committee process with a bill that would address this issue. And House Bill 29 actually expires June 30 of this year, and I'm not sure that the Affordable Care Act tenets are really go into effect until 14. We're trying to deal with the issue of health care exchanges. I was on the Virginia Health Reform Initiative. And, you know, this is not the process of how we should operate when we do the budget. Put a bill in, go through the process, have it vetted and heard by either the Committee on Commerce and Labor or the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions. Then we can have the public policy debate in that forum, not here on the floor when we're dealing with an $84 billion budget, two-year budget. I would thank the body.
Gentleman from Richmond City, Mr. LaPase. Okay. The gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a very simple proposition. Either we are serious about the Jefferson Statute of Religious Freedom and not telling our citizens that we're going to submit to a federal government that wants their conscience to be violated, or will not. Moreover, we do refer to federal law. The redistricting bill that we passed out of here referred to Title V of the Voting Rights Act. So that's nothing new. Mr. Speaker, the Virginia government should not facilitate this process in any way. That's all this does. It doesn't interfere with anything else.
Gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Torian.
Mr. Speaker, and this body, as one who represents a religious institution that employs individuals, I certainly hope that at this juncture that I continue to have the freedom and those who we employ to determine how we would like to interact with our insurance company. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The questions on the adoption of the budget amendment offered by the gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Marshall. Shall the amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 16, noes 84.
Ayes 16, noes 84. The amendment is not agreed to. That all the amendments. Gentleman from Bedford, Mr. Putney.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the constitutional reading be dispensed with and House Bill 29 be placed on its passage.
Shall the third constitutional reading of House Bill 29 be dispensed? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, noes 0.
Ayes 99, noes 0. The motion is agreed to. Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, noes 0.
Ayes 100, noes 0. The bill is passed.